With everything in life getting more and more expensive, I know a lot of you guys are looking for ways to build a home theater that won't break the bank. Well, today I'm talking about a brand new series from Sioux Research. This is the MFL-6 as well as the D15 Chimera and also the SC, which is the supercharger add-on that you can add to the D15. So in this video, I just want to share with you my experience so far with the 5 speakers. I've got 5 identical MFL-6 speakers. I've got a front left, center channel, right, surround left, surround right, and I'm using currently the D15 in its sealed configuration. So this is not with the SC add-on, the supercharger. But I wanted to share my experience with this system. And really the premise was, I've been reviewing some pretty high-end stuff. I've got Trenov over here. I own an Anthem AVM 70. I've got a Marantz Cinema 30 in the living room. So these are getting on up there, especially the Trenov. And I hear you guys. You're like, Michael, I don't have the money for Trenov. I don't have the money for JTR. But what about us? Is there something that we could buy that would fit in a much more budget-friendly system and not break the bank? And the short answer is yes. Now with every home theater system, it's got its limitations. And so I'm going to be frank with you. I'm going to share with you the limitations that I ran into with this system in my dedicated theater room. Now later I want to share with you some of the challenges with this system as well, so that you just kind of get a big picture of what the system's capable of and where you're going to be limited in. So the first thing I want to talk about is just aesthetics. I love the style and the finish of the Sioux Research MFL-6s as well as the D15 Chimera. It's super smooth, has kind of a glossy look to it. The drivers on them look really sexy. Of course, if you want to keep them covered, they've got the grill. These aren't magnetic grills. I'm a fan of magnetic grills. I actually prefer that than the actual pegs. It's just a lot easier to add and remove in a system, but not a big deal. Typically, you're either on one side of the fence or the other. You're either going to leave the grills on or you're going to leave the grills off. I prefer to leave them off in the theater room. In the living room, wife's a different story, so she likes me to keep the grills on, and I respect that. So the design of the MFL speakers is such that you don't have to tow in the speakers. They've got an angled front baffle, and so ideally, when you've got them positioned in your room, just straight up against the wall, maybe mounted to the wall, you don't have to buy any special brackets to angle them in. They're already towed in. You just have to figure out how wide to get them to aim at your listening position, and that's really going to be determined by the distance you are from the front wall. One thing you want to consider with this system are the angles of each speaker. So you can see here at the top of the speaker, it's angled right there on the front baffle. So in my living room, initially I was going to set it up here and do some testing, but I ran into a couple of things. So number one, I've got a pretty high entertainment center here. And because of that, you can see the angle of that center channel would shoot way over my head. So the only way to combat that is I would have to lower it. So if I were to take this center channel and maybe let's say I bring it down to about this level and it's firing up, the problem is now I've got this coffee table that it's going to be, sound's going to be reflecting off, and it's going to kind of block, my listening position there. So if you're going to utilize this center channel, you really need to have an unobstructed view from wherever it's going to be, and preferably it's going to need to be lower. Have nothing in between, like this coffee table, to your listening position. Also, if you have multiple rows in your theater room, that also presents a challenge because now that center channel, because it's much lower in your room, it's going to be more difficult to go past that front row and then over to the rear row if you've got like 2 rows of seating like I do in my dedicated theater room. Another issue is on the other side of the center channel, you can see they have feet. So if you're going to use this as a center channel, you either have to deal with the feet being present, or you have to take a screwdriver and unscrew them but then you're going to have 4 holes in the side of the center channel. So again, those are just some things to think about when you're looking at this system. Now you might be thinking, well, what if we took this and flip it upside down? The problem is if you flip it upside down, now instead of angling up, it's going to be angling down. So in my case, it'd be angling down towards this coffee table. And again, that still wouldn't be a good option. And one additional thought concerning the angle of the speakers is the further that you sit back, the wider that you're going to need to put your speakers. So in my case, I believe I'm about 11 feet, maybe 12 feet from the speakers. So I would need to place those about 11 feet apart. The reason being is if I look dead on axis of this speaker, I have to move quite a bit over on the couch. So you can see this is kind of the middle of it. So I'm over maybe about, I don't know, almost a foot over to be able to be directly in line with that. And so I either need to be sitting closer if they're going to be that close, or I need to move those speakers out further, which is where the Martin Logans are there. So that's why I had these speaker stands right here. So the plan was to put them here, but I just think that in this living room, it's probably not the best solution, especially because I've got this table right here that's in the way. And then we've got this larger cabinet up here that puts that center channel angled up entirely too high. If you have an acoustically transparent screen, you could utilize this directly behind the screen. You're just going to need to turn this speaker at an angle to where this front baffle is flat and facing forward. So you can see here how much of an angle it's going to need to be facing. And then that takes this rear port and just kind of fires it at an angle behind that. Probably not a big deal. But again, I think if they were to come out with a rectangular, kind of a regular center channel, maybe with no feet that you could lay horizontally, I think that would be a much better solution for those of you that are going to use this as a dedicated center channel. And if you're planning on using the speakers on speaker stands, you're going to need some pretty wide ones. As you can see here, that's not going to fit either way I position that. Basically, this speaker is about 10 inches long from the very front corner to this back corner. I believe it's about 8 inches wide. The actual feet, the longest ones, are about 8 inches from those two. So these speaker stands here, they're 8 inches this way, but they're only 6 inches this way. So no matter how I try to position that on there, it's not going to work. And you can't take the feet off because this is down firing. There's a port here. And so you'd be blocking that port here. So that's not going to work either. So one solution that Dr. Sue recommends is actually placing them on top of the D15 Chimera subwoofer. So here you can see it's going to put it about at ear level. In my seating position, the tweeter right there is probably about 2 or 3 inches. The mid-range driver here is more in line with where my ears are right here. And so if you were to place them on there, depending on your distance as far as the width and where you're sitting, how far back, you may need to angle these kind of more towards you, or if you wanted them to face straight so that it just looks nice and aesthetically pleasing and have that angle do its thing, then you're going to need to probably move the subwoofer and the speaker over closer to, towards the center. And that way that would align that tweeter and the mid-range driver right at your listening position. So on the rear of these speakers, there are 2 different sets of brackets. And so you can mount these either vertical on your wall, or you can turn them sideways and mount it horizontal. That would be perfect for like a center channel. But that also gives you some flexibility if you want to use these for height speakers. Now, not necessarily using these as on ceiling because that does offer some challenges. Plus there's some liability if it were to fall. But if you were to mount these on the wall, height speakers, you've got some flexibility there. You could either mount them vertically. I think it'd be better to turn them sideways so that the speakers are angled straight down to you. And that would be a really, really cool height speakers for your front as well as the back if you're mounting them on the wall. Now you are limited to just the black finish. So we don't have a white, we don't have any kind of wood grain finishes. So you're limited there. So if you need something more than just black, this may not be a good fit for you. Now, although the finish is super smooth and super soft, if you touch this, you're going to get fingerprints on it. And so just keep that in mind. Typically, once we set them up, we normally don't have to touch them very often unless you're dusting. But in that, you're going to have a rag, to dust them off, or a light cloth. But just know going into it, I prefer mounting them or, setting them up in the room using the gloves. I know it seems kind of weird, but there's a reason why they include them. They know that you're going to get fingerprints all over these, and then you just got to spend a lot of time cleaning them and kind of wiping them down to get that oil and residue off your fingers that are going to be placed on the speakers and subwoofer. But the overall look and style and finish, I like what I see. These are really nice, especially considering they're only $279 each for the speakers. Now at that price point, this definitely falls into budget-friendly speakers, at least from my point of view. The Chimera, the D15 Chimera, isn't what I would consider a super budget because it's over $1,000. It's not super cheap, but I think it's attainable. It's very affordable. In comparison, my JTR speakers are around $4,000 each, so big difference there. Now, if you don't have the budget for the D15 Chimera, Sue definitely has some even more affordable ones, some even under $1,000. So you can always mix and match if your budget doesn't allow for something this high end. So as with all of my reviews, I go through the same Kaleidescape script that I created many months ago when I built my Kaleidescape system. So I've got a certain amount of music, a certain amount of movies. There's some quiet scenes. Now, of course, I don't have a Dolby Atmos system. This is just a 5.1 system. So I've just got just a bed layer speakers and then one subwoofer. So I don't have any overheads. I don't have any height effects. So that definitely changes the dynamic of what I'm used to. But still, I'll share with you what that experience was like. Now, I use this Kaleidescape script on every one of my demos because I'm super familiar with it. I'm familiar with the music. I'm familiar with the action sequences. I'm familiar with the effects through the bed layer as well as the height speakers. And I'm also very familiar with the amount of LFE and even the low end extension that a lot of these clips have. And so it helps me to better figure out what are the limitations of a system, or does it seem to have any? Now, I'm always willing to share my Kaleidescape script with you. If you've got Kaleidescape, just shoot me an email, youthman@obsessedhometheater.com. Be glad to send that over to you. Of course, you're going to have the movie clips that I have. You have to purchase those in your library, but at least you don't have to build the script. It's already there for you. So going through my typical demos, here are just some things that I noticed. Number one, having a 5.1 system can still provide a really great home theater experience for you. This room's 13 feet wide, 19 feet deep, 10-foot ceilings, and this 5.1 speaker system did a really good job, not only just providing an immersive experience, but also providing some good tactile bass in my main listening position. In clips like Dune, Top Gun Maverick, Furiosa, as well as A Quiet Place, there's a lot of LFE in there, and the Chimera D15 did a great job of providing some very tactile bass, very clean bass, as long as you didn't drive it beyond its capability. Typically, I run about -10 dB below reference, okay? So on the AVR, if it's calibrating to reference level, I run about -10 dB. Now, for this series of videos that I'm doing on this budget system, I did get a Onkyo RZ30. So this is on the more budget friendly. It's not a $3,000 AVR or $5,000 AVR. Again, not super inexpensive because it's above $1,000, but it's still affordable. It's still attainable. And so with that, I ran direct live with bass control, and I tend to add about a 5 dB boost on the low end. So I add a house curve to kind of accentuate the bass frequencies since our ears aren't as sensitive to the lower frequencies. So when I ran direct, I did a 3 dB, a 4 dB, and a 5 dB boost, and I save those as presets. And what that allows me to do is in the Onkyo, I can easily pull up the app and I can switch between those three presets at any time. Now, some of these scenes have some really low frequencies, And that's one of the areas that I definitely could see that the Chimera D15 without the supercharger is not going to be able to perform as well as something that digs a little bit deeper. So if you're running just the D15 Chimera without the supercharger, in my room, I was able to reach down to about 30 hertz, and then it began to roll off pretty quickly. On their website, they're showing about 25 hertz. So it probably is going to depend on your room where you're going to be able to extend down to. But just know that this is not a 20 hertz and below type subwoofer. You'll need to add the $500 additional supercharger to this to convert it to ported if you want to dig down to those extensions. Now in my setup, I've got 418s and they extend down into the single digits. So I feel that bass when that thud happens. There's some other scenes in different movies to where I would expect to hear that, but you could just tell these just don't reach down that low. So if you're somebody that's chasing sub 20 hertz, and I always recommend for home theater, at least get a subwoofer that reaches down to 20 hertz, because to me, you're missing some really cool and fun tactile experience in those bass regions when you're watching movies if your subwoofer can't handle down to 20 hertz and below. So if you're buying 3 or 5 speakers or even more, adding a subwoofer for a home theater experience, I think the supercharger would be a better option. I just think the D15 by itself would not be my preference for home theater because I really, really want to be able to at least hit 20, and I'd love to get down to about 10 or below. So unless you add the supercharger, you're not going to expect to be able to get down much below probably 25 hertz. Now, one thing this system does really well is the area of vocals. The vocals are actually pretty forward sounding. This isn't a veiled speaker. It's not a laid back type of speaker. So if you're one that likes just a real kind of chill, relaxed sound, this probably isn't the best system for you. This is a very detailed system. The vocals are going to sound forward. I tend to like forward vocals. To me, there's just more presence there, and it's just what my ears prefer. But this system did a great job. So when I was listening to A Star Is Born, when I was listening to some music tracks from The Greatest Showman, vocals sounded very clean, very natural. They didn't get lost in the musical score. During the dialogue of an action sequence, same thing. You know, when you're watching something like Midway, there's a lot going on, but they're also talking in the middle of all these explosions. And with a weaker system and a vocal that isn't as forward, those can get lost in all of that excitement. Now, the MFL-6s didn't have any issues with the level of volume that I like to listen to. Again, I'm typically about 10 decibels below reference. I think these would be fine to hit reference, and I was only powering them with the Onkyo. So this is only 5 speakers that it's having to power. Had absolutely no issues driving this system. Now, Dirac did assign a crossover to each speaker, so they're not having to extend any frequencies really low. All of that's being passed off to the subwoofer, which allows them to play cleaner and louder than they would if you were to run them full range. Now, my personal preference is to run my speakers with a crossover. There's no reason, in my opinion, to run them full range. Even if you got big towers, I still use a crossover and send those lower frequencies to the subwoofer because that's what the subwoofer is designed to do. It's specifically designed to handle certain frequencies, in particular, the really low ones. And so there's no speakers out there, or at least very few speakers out there, that can handle cleanly down to 20 hertz. And there's very few that's going to be able to handle down to 10 hertz and especially even below that. Now let's talk a little bit about the subwoofer. The subwoofer, as I mentioned, I was getting good tactile response here in my theater seat. This is my primary listening position. I'm on a concrete floor, so I don't get any additional reinforcement from like a floating floor or if I was on a second floor in a home, because that's wood and that bass would travel through the wood and then travel through the seats. So I'm not getting any additional reinforcement, but this subwoofer did a good job at providing some tactile response here in my seat. Now, where the subwoofer is limited is in those low frequencies. Again, this subwoofer is designed to play down to about 30 hertz. maybe down to 25 hertz. So frequencies below that is really going to be a struggle for this to reproduce. It's going to drop off, but it's still, the woofer is going to want to have some excursion. And so I was playing at negative 10 dB on the AVR, on the Onkyo RZ30. Subwoofer's gains at half. The Q is set to 0.7, which was set by default from the factory. And then the Onkyo in the trim levels after running Dirac had set the trim level for the subwoofer at negative 11.5. Now with those settings, there were a couple of times during some of those scenes that the subwoofer really just reached its capability. Now keep in mind, no matter what subwoofer you buy, every subwoofer is going to have a limit. You just have to figure out what are those limits and make sure that you stay within those limits so that you're always generating a great experience and a pleasant experience, and you're not overdriving the subwoofer beyond its capabilities. So with that, watching a couple of scenes such as Midway, there's a part in the bombing of Pearl Harbor where the bomb drops from the airplane and it hits the ship, and when it lands on the boat and explodes, the subwoofer at negative 10 volume definitely reached its limits. I had to back the volume down to negative 15 to where it was smooth and clean, and I didn't hear any sounds that were not natural. I found the same thing true during Top Gun Maverick. During the 2 minutes and 15 seconds, at the very beginning when Maverick punches it and the afterburners kick in, if I had it at negative 10, it wasn't a pleasant experience. I had to back it down to negative 15, and then it was smooth, sounded great, just wasn't quite as impactful because I had to back down the gain, or at least the volume on the AVR. Now, I always recommend running dual subwoofers. By running dual subwoofers, there's a lot of benefits to that. Not only can you get better seat-to-seat response, you're going to allow the subwoofer to play cleaner because it's having some additional horsepower from the other subwoofer. So both of them playing, you can back them down so that you're still getting the same impact, but at a lower volume per subwoofer. Now, of course, adding dual subwoofers is going to double the cost of your subwoofers, but I think the benefits are fantastic, so I always recommend going dual subs when you can. I truly believe that SU Research is one of those companies out there that just provides a ton of value. And I don't mean value in cheap. Like, I don't think these speakers are cheap. They just don't cost a lot. There's a difference in that. When I see something that's cheap, I don't even want to make a video about it because it's junk. These aren't junk. These are nice quality speakers. They're just not super amazing high performance that you're going to get in something that, you know, is a much larger driver or large compression horns, things like that. So again, you just have to know the limitations of the system. But for this size room and this system, I think it's a good fit. Now, when you start getting into the $300 and below for speakers, not only are the solutions more limited, a lot of them truthfully just aren't worth the money. I'd rather save up, spend more, or even buy on the used market than go to some of those speakers. This system for $300, or really I think $279 for the speakers themselves, I think it's a huge value in what you get. In a future video, I'll be installing the Chimera supercharger, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. And of course, I'll leave links to all these products down in the description below. Hope you guys have an incredible week. God bless, and I will catch you in the next video.